actually including the next generation, right? Yeah. If you have some parents who have built this business and they have adult children and they're getting ready to sell for a meaningful amount of money and they want to create generational wealth, the time is now to start involving the children in that process.
We all exit our company eventually. The question is, will it be on your terms or someone else's? Strategy matters. Timing matters. The right partner changes everything. Brought to you by Meritage Partners. Here is your host, Brian Franco, author of The Inevitable Exit. This is the M&A Guy Podcast.
Every entrepreneur dreams about the day the business sells, the purchase price, the celebration, the freedom. But the truth is that the closing is not the finish line. It's the starting line of an entirely new responsibility and possibility, because building wealth is one skill and preserving it for generations is another. I'm Brian Franco, founder and CEO of Meritage Partners, and of course, your host of the M&A Guy Podcast, where we help founders build transferable businesses, increase enterprise value, and ultimately create lasting legacies. Today's guest helps entrepreneurs answer one of the most important questions they'll ever face. Now what? Right, is what you're asking. So Scott Escujuri is a senior wealth advisor and attorney at Legacy Wealth. Scott, thank you for being on the podcast. Tell us more about yourself, Scott, and your experience.
Brian, thank you for having me. Yes, I practiced law for about 15 years.
Okay.
All different areas of law, estate planning, family law, watching families fall apart, separating businesses, things like that. And a handful of years ago, I ended up deciding to transition out of that and into the wealth management space. I started working with Legacy Wealth Management. We're a boutique RIA based out of Boise, Idaho. I'm one of the senior wealth advisors here. I work primarily with our firm's largest clients, especially those who have gone through either inheritances or large liquidation events, maybe a sale of a business or other assets. And we focus very much on all of the planning that goes along with that. Not just, where we invest the money is kind of the last question, really. It's more, what do we do? How do we deal with the taxes that are going to arise? How do we make sure that this money is going to survive and be able to now replace the income that's gone from selling a business or whatever the case may be? So
that's awesome. Yeah, thank you for being here and thank you for sharing your wisdom and your insights. But to the audience here, Scott, you could tell already, he doesn't simply just help his clients manage money. He helps preserve the legacy they spent decades creating. In some cases, some of our clients are centennial businesses where they're third or fourth generation. So let's dive in, Scott. I have some good questions for us. I know the audience they constantly give us feedback and they're constantly looking for, actionable advice and direction. Of course, we'll give them an opportunity on how to connect with you. But let me just reframe as we spoke in the beginning, because the exit is just the beginning. And that might sound exciting. That might sound discouraging to some. It's like, gosh, we just went through this entire liquidity event. But the reality is we work in parallel. And a lot of the same information that we're working off of, you're working off of. And a lot of the same conversations we're having with clients, you're also having with clients. So Scott, so many entrepreneurs spend 10, 20, 30 years building a company. But as you and I both know, very few of them spend very little time preparing for the life after the sale. And I like to frame a question always, what you're exiting, right? If you choose to exit, what are you exiting into? And this episode is going to shine a lot of light on that. But Scott, from your experience, what's the biggest surprise? I know there's a lot, but what's one of the biggest surprises founders face once the transaction actually closes and funds?
Well, man, there are so many. I think one of the biggest surprises that business owners face is really that the unexpected shock of, what do I do now? They think they know, they see dollar signs because they know how big the check is going to be that they're going to get. But there's almost never a thought that goes into, what do we do with it once we have it, right? All they know is that the money is coming. And oftentimes that's a big enough amount of money that they think they don't even need to worry anymore. But they never actually take the time to think, what do I do with it now? How do I replace my income? How do I grow it? How do I save it? All of those things.
Correct. I love that perspective because, we tell founders all the time, the goal isn't just creating this liquidity event. It's ultimately to create freedom, and freedom of their time is really what resonates with people, including myself. But freedom without any plan is simply it just creates uncertainty. So we want to drive that certainty home,
Absolutely.
dilute and eliminate the uncertainty, right? And we're going to define what are they exiting into. And the biggest challenge isn't selling the company. That's what we're here for. It's knowing what to do after the sale. And so I'm sure you have a lot of methods. No two deals are ever the same. No, every deal is different and unique because everyone has their own sets of expectations and narratives, what have you. But, Scott, I want to talk about protecting the wealth before it's created through the liquidity event. And what's interesting and kind of ironic is, we've had very, very wealthy families that developed and created their wealth from the very business that they're selling. But they sell it because that business is now perceived to be a threat to the wealth that they created. And now there's all sorts of businesses, some businesses have more liabilities than others, right? But let's talk about wealth preservation and protection, because many owners don't think about or even begin to think about tax strategy, estate planning until there's an LOI on the table or letter of intent. In your experience, why is waiting till the LOI is on the table a massive and potentially expensive mistake?
Because the longer you wait, the fewer options you have, right? Especially when it comes to certain types of planning, whether it's tax planning or estate planning. Like you said, it's so important to preserve wealth. But one of the very first things that a client can do to preserve wealth is not pay as much in taxes, right? I mean, every dollar saved is a dollar earned from that standpoint. But sometimes I'll have clients that come to me that say, hey, I'm closing I've got a business sale on paper. We're closing in the next 2 weeks. And there's certainly things we can do at that point, but there's some things that we can't. And that can be from whether it's planning out the estate, are there trusts that are going to be implemented? Are there tax saving strategies? There's many different types of tax focused investment vehicles that clients can get into. But some of them, a lot of people don't understand. The more you have time to prepare for them, the more advantageous you can make them. Whether sometimes, for example, if you've got a client that's wanting to donate money to a charity, they can wait till the business sells and they can donate money and they can get a write-off for some of that donation. But if we as an advisor have enough time in advance to work with someone like you that's helping structure the deal, we can actually make it where potentially a portion of the business goes into a different type of entity that then can donate it. And then they get an even larger benefit for the same type of donation. So there's so many different things like that can happen if we have enough time to plan for it.
Agreed. And that's exactly why preparation is such a major theme in the book that I wrote, The Inevitable Exit, because every year, a client waits, limits their options later. And, it's best said, the best tax strategy happens before the deal, not after. And what we've seen recently, July 4th of last year, 2025, the Big Beautiful Bill Act has come into play. And if you're structured as a C corporation and you qualify as a QSBS or a qualified small business, then you potentially can eliminate up to $15 million of your capital gains tax, if I'm not mistaken. And but you have to be a C Corp, and you have had to have been a C Corp for 5 years. You can't just flip that switch the day before the transaction and poof, you get the benefit. How have you seen the QSBS impact transactions in that sense? I bring that up as one of many examples, but let's focus on that one.
I mean, that's really a very powerful one. People don't understand or maybe underestimate the significant value of being able to save such a massive amount of taxes at the time of a sale. But like you said, there's so much planning that needs to go at it. I think a lot of times because people don't understand it, they get turned off to the idea. For example, when I was in law school, I had a law professor in my business tax class who would say, unless you're publicly traded, if you're a C Corp, the attorney that created that is just committing malpractice, right? Why pay double taxes? Why do all those things? And so sometimes people get afraid of, I don't want to become a C corporation because then there's more taxes I have to pay and this and that. Well, the taxes that get paid for those couple years, those 5 years or whatever that you're a C Corp are minuscule in comparison with the amount of taxes that can be saved if that is properly structured as a Section 1202 sale, like you've alluded to. But again, you cannot just flip that switch. That takes years of planning. And that's so that's one of the things where we coordinate with the client's CPAs, with the broker, with the people helping them sell their business, right? All of those things, the more time that exists, the better the plan that can be created to help there.
Yeah. We've seen some clients re-domicile their entities out of state or in a more tax friendly state, as an example. And but we also recently, I won't use any names, but I actually had a CPA firm that they were focused on tax preparation, not so much tax advisory, but they're looking to sell their firm. And there's a massive amount of roll-ups with CPA firms right now. And the CPA told me, they said, Brian, we want to go to market, but not yet. We're in the process of converting from a C corporation to an S corporation.
Oh my.
And I said, well, wait, stop. I said, you need better advice here. And this was a CPA speaking. Now, granted, their expertise wasn't tax; it was tax preparation, not tax strategy. And so we were able to intervene early enough in that scenario where they were able to take the time and learn more about why they should remain a C corporation. And that would probably sound pretty surprising to viewers and listeners tuned in with us today, but it does happen. And this is why it's important to have the right advisors on your team, because there are costs related to advisory work, but the tax benefit and the tax savings outweighs the cost by 10, 20, 30 times in some cases when you think
really,
about all this.
And that's actually a really important example you just gave, because one of the questions I regularly get from my clients is, why didn't my CPA tell me about this? Why save this money here or there? And people don't realize CPAs, for them, I'm not going to say all, but many of them, they're not giving tax advice. They're making sure that your books are clean. They're making sure your taxes are filed appropriately, helping you avoid getting audited, or making sure that if you do, you're going to pass. But they're not out there trying to scour the market for tax saving strategies or investment strategies that can help with that. And so the fact that you have a CPA that almost made that blunder, which would have been significantly costly to them, is a striking example of why it's important to expand your network of who you're talking to as you're getting ready to make these kinds of decisions. You don't just talk to your CPA. You don't just talk to your attorney, because everyone has their own lane of specialty, and you need to make sure that all of the lanes are covered.
100%. And that's why I brought that example. I wasn't intending to throw anyone under the bus, but is someone as obvious as a CPA, to their defense, they just aren't aware of these options, and optionality is key. I also talk a lot about optionality in my book, but optionality is key, because the more options you have more options. You have the ability to meet your expectations that you've developed, and whether that's in headlining valuation or the net proceeds, which guys like you and I, we like to look at the net proceeds, right?
Sure.
Because that's a great starting point. I want to jump over into building generational wealth. And I know this is a bit of an overplayed word or phrase, I should say, generational wealth. But what it really means to our clients is, they like I said before, they've built their business for a decade or multiple decades, and they have generated a tremendous amount of wealth from the cash flow that the business generated. But this is that income versus outcome illustration that I commonly do. And the income is great, but the income could be supplemented. The outcome is taking that liquidity event, that large sum of cash, and then putting that into some sort of strategy. It might be single discipline or multidiscipline strategy. So Scott, you work with families who are thinking decades or years ahead of a sale. What's the difference between someone who simply has money and someone who's truly building generational wealth? What's the mindset difference?
That's a great question. And the mindset difference is enormous, actually, because when you have a family office that is working on creating generational wealth, or maybe they're already on the second or third generation of that, the way that they view the world, and particularly their assets and how they're creating and preserving it, is significantly different than the average person who has a few $1 million saved up and comes in and sits down with an advisor, right? They're not trying to hit the cover off the ball. They're not trying to do anything crazy. They have what we call patient capital. They know that long term, they have certain goals, and all they want to do is achieve those goals. And so they're not calling their advisor every other week saying, hey, my account's down a couple bucks today, or why isn't it up as much as it should be? Because their vision is completely different. They are not just trying to retire off the money they have today. They are looking at, how are we going to keep this family enterprise alive for generations, so our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. And they're focused on, everything they do is focused on that. It's not just, how am I going to cover my paychecks for my retirement?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because the business may create the wealth, but the leadership will preserve it. Scott, I couldn't agree more because the business may create the wealth that we're talking about, but leadership ultimately preserves that wealth. And money doesn't create legacy alone. Intentional planning does. And you touched on that, and that's important, but it comes with planning. And that's the planning that you do. Scott, I have a question for you, but really I want to double it as, this is your parting advice for those listening to you and in your years in law and your years in wealth advisory and all the case studies you've worked on. But if you could leave every entrepreneur listening to us right now with one piece of advice about preparing for the day their business becomes liquid, what would that advice be?
Start now and talk to the right people. Sit down with the people, whether it's including a financial advisor, your tax professionals, whoever you're working with to sell the business, someone like you, Brian, and Meritage, or your estate planning attorneys, because there's so many different ways that you can tackle the issues that arise. And when you can have your team of professionals collaborating with each other and bouncing ideas off of each other and making sure that the plan is going to be the best possible for you, that is what I would say is the most important advice that I would give. And to not get too focused on one thing. Sometimes I'll have clients who come in that are so afraid of paying taxes that either they don't want to sell their business or they're going to make really crappy investments with money because they're trying to avoid taxes. And so really the more time that you have to work with your CPAs and someone like me, your advisor, to really understand what the taxes are going to look like, what some reasonable strategies are that will help with that, but also to not let that tail wag the dog and give up on other really good potential opportunities with your money just out of fear of paying taxes. I mean, when people will a lot of times go from being asset rich and cash poor before they sell their business to now they're cash rich, right? All their entire asset is now in cash. And they just really don't understand what to do with it and how to approach that. So just taking the time to be methodical, to plan it out, to talk to the right people, to investigate and understand the different strategies is so critical.
Yeah. Great advice. Let me follow up with this. What have you seen when families or entrepreneurs, they don't plan and they don't have options? I know this is a bit of on the negative side, but it's important for the audience to hear this because it really helps them with this paradigm shift that we're ultimately provoking in them. But what happens when they don't plan?
Well, several things. One is they end up paying way more tax than they probably otherwise could have. Right. Yeah. And if you think about someone who maybe is selling a business for $10 million, let's say, right, that's a big chunk of money. And on its surface, right, people may be like, oh, I'm set for life. I don't need to worry about it anymore. I have so much money. But when suddenly they're looking down the prospect of having to write a $2 or $3 million check just for taxes, right? I mean, that can become massive. And so having to pay more taxes than you need to, limiting your options on what you can do with the money, frankly. That, like I said, there are just some strategies out there that allow you more options, more available runway if you take the time to plan it in advance. And so every day that goes by, I mean, almost think of it like shutting a door. And it doesn't mean that the doors that are left are bad. You just have fewer of them to be able to choose from. And so in my mind, the worst thing a person can do is do no planning at all, get a check and just say, well, I'll just pay all the taxes and do that. Because, I mean, for us, when we work with a client that's selling or has sold a business, obviously how we can grow their wealth is significant. But one thing that really never gets tracked, right? When I sit down and I go through with one of my clients and I show them their statements and their performance, one thing that doesn't ever really show up on there are tax savings and the money that they still have in their pocket, right? If you save someone $1 million in taxes, I mean, that's massive. And that's life-changing in a way. I mean, that can fund an entire generation of wealth, depending on what the client's goals are and what they're planning to do. So every day that goes by, a door closes. And so you want to keep as many of those doors open as possible.
Yeah. And said differently, the work we do at Meritage Partners, we're really focused on accessing the highest enterprise value. And the work that you collectively do with us is helping our collective clients preserve as much as that money as possible, because you used a $10 million transaction. And if 20 to 30%, maybe 33% of that's going to the federal government in the form of taxes, to net the same proceeds, we would have to sell that same business that is likely not worth, 12 to 13 million if the market's saying 10 in this illustration. That helps us to really capture those net proceeds. And that's where the legacy is. It's in the net proceeds, not in the top line valuation. And so working together shoulder to shoulder with common clients is always a winning strategy, because we have those different inputs and we have that different advice, because we all live in our own lanes. And it's important to have, like you said earlier, have the right people on your team, people that have been there, people that have done that over and over and over again, because we learn from every transaction. I learn from every transaction that we do, and we take that and we apply that to future opportunities as well. And a lot of that's because, rules are always changing. The IRS is always updating, and we have to be mindful of that. And specifically, in from the capacity of giving our clients that right advice.
Well, and not only are the rules always changing, which is a never-ending battle, on top of that, but one of the things that's amazing to me is how different every client is, both from what their goals are going into a sale, what their goals are coming out of the sale. I mean, I've got a client now that's going through the process of selling a business for more money than they will ever spend. They live a very modest life, and through years and years of hard work have created a business that has a pretty significant value, probably unfathomable to them, really, with the lifestyle that they live. And they just, that their needs are very different from the guy who is wanting to drive around. I'll make sure he can still have, 3 McLarens in his garage and buy a new Lamborghini next. So every person is different, whether they want to donate to charities, whether they give to their church, whether they want to spend all their money, whether they want to leave money to their children, or they think their children are spoiled and they want to leave it to the grandchildren. It's just the possibilities and the permutations of that are just infinite. And so, like you said, every deal you learn from, not necessarily that theirs is going to be the exact same thing you implement for someone else, but it just gives additional perspective in how you can help each new person, their exceptionally unique circumstance, be able to build what is most important to them.
In legacy, or part of that legacy is charitable donations. And I think a lot of listeners can sometimes confuse, charitable giving to a church or exclusively a church. Sure. It most certainly can be, but your legacy is part of what's the mark you're leaving on this world when you leave. Right. And so we've had clients set up their own 501c3s. We have a client that does a lot of educational work in third world countries, and that's part of their family's legacy. And so if you can, take a family like that who's charitably minded and give them a vehicle in which they can have more tools than they have today to further that work, I mean, that's a win. And that certainly speaks to the legacy of that family. And to those, go ahead.
But throw in there real quick, Brian, too, is part of that planning too becomes, in my mind, especially where you're talking about, we want to create generational wealth, is actually including the next generation, right? Yeah. If you have some parents who have built this business and they have adult children and they're getting ready to sell for a meaningful amount of money and they want to create generational wealth, the time is now to start involving the children in that process, even before the sale, so that they know potentially the money that's coming, or at least have some concept of the money that's coming, what the parents' wishes are, what their goals are, how they want to see their legacy survive, but also with the understanding and helping to educate the parents that the world is changing, right? And what worked for you over the last 30 or 40 years may not work again to duplicate. And so it's okay that your kids maybe want to do things a little differently. One of the most significant factors in family offices falling apart from one generation to the next is a lack of alignment of values. And it doesn't mean the values have to be the same, but they at least need to be on the same page in talking. So I would say involve your adult children. Let them be involved and learn through the process as you're going, and really understand what you're trying to do and what your lifelong goals are, this wealth that you've now created, so that they can help in their own way, and in their own way that's acceptable to you as the founders, carry on that legacy for you.
Yeah, you're spot on. Scott, thank you so much for sharing, your experiences, your wisdom, and some of the case studies you shared with us. And speaking to, those in the audience, if today's conversation changed the way you think about building and preserving wealth, then I'd encourage you to take the next steps and reach out to Scott. We're going to have his contact information in the show notes so you can speak with him and have a discovery call with him to learn more about, or so that he can learn more about you and your family and your legacy and what you're looking to accomplish. I also encourage you to pick up a copy of my book, The Inevitable Exit. You can find that at inevitableexit.com. Inside, I share the exact framework that we use to help founders transform their business into transferable assets while protecting the legacy that you're creating. And if you're looking to surround yourself with entrepreneurs who are intentionally building valuable companies, not just successful businesses, I invite you to join us inside our Empire Builder community. This is a community where we collect as founders and CEOs, and we talk about the challenges and the opportunities that are ahead. And the nice thing about this community is you have former clients that have been there and done that. They say it's lonely at the top, and there's a lot of truth to that. So this is a fun environment, an educational environment where you could come and be part of that and interact. So I encourage you to join us. That's at empire-builder.com, because the greatest exits don't just happen by accident. They're built intentionally, as you've heard today. So a successful transaction creates wealth, but intentional planning, as we talked about today, creates legacy. Thanks for joining us on the M&A Guy Podcast. I'm Brian Franco. Keep building intentionally, protect what you've built, and exit on your terms. We'll see you next week.